You're not bad at communicating. You're just reacting too fast when emotions spike. Here's the sentence that changes everything. Give me a second to think about how I want to respond. That pause lowers the temperature without shutting the conversation down. This sentence helps, but it's only half of emotional control. The other half is explained in today's Stoic Focus Lab episode. You're on your commute, phone in one hand at a red light, staring at a message that just hit your screen. We need to talk about what happened. Your stomach drops, your face gets hot, and your mind starts building a courtroom case before you've even parked. By the time you walk through your front door, you're already arguing with someone who isn't even in the room. Here's the uncomfortable truth. When you lose control in arguments you care about, it's rarely because you're too emotional. It's because you're trying to solve the relationship and defend your identity at the exact same time, at full speed. Use this sentence today, exactly as written. Give me a second to think about how I want to respond. Say it once, then stop talking for 3 breaths. In the next 10 minutes, your body comes down a notch, your thoughts stop stampeding, and you buy yourself the one thing you never get in a heated exchange: choice. Instead of texting a paragraph you'll later delete, you send one calm line, and the conversation stays open instead of turning into a fire. Educational content inspired by classical Stoic texts. Not medical, psychological, financial, or legal advice. If this keeps happening, it doesn't stay small. It shows up in your marriage or dating life as repeat fights that start over dishes or tone but end with old wounds getting reopened. It shows up at work as a slack thread that turns into tension with a teammate you actually respect, and suddenly you're rereading your own message wondering if you sounded hostile. It shows up with money as arguments about spending that don't feel like numbers, they feel like trust and safety. It shows up in friendships as you get sharp, defensive, or distant, and later you wonder why the connection feels thinner than it used to. The cost is simple and brutal. You lose respect for yourself in the exact moments you want to show up with maturity. Today you're going to learn how to stay clear under pressure without acting cold, how to speak in a way that lowers the temperature instead of raising it, and how to walk away from hard conversations feeling steady, not embarrassed. You'll have a simple structure for what to say when your heart is pounding and your pride wants to sprint. You'll know how to slow an argument down without stonewalling, without over-explaining, and without turning it into a dramatic exit. And you'll learn how to hold your boundaries in a way that doesn't turn into an attack, so you can be firm and still be fair. Subscribing helps because these lessons are built to be practiced, not just understood, and repetition is how calm becomes automatic. Stay with me until the very end, and while you're here, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. First, you'll learn how to catch the surge early, before your mouth starts trying to win the moment. Next, you'll learn one move that keeps you from getting hooked by accusations, sarcasm, or loaded questions. Then, you'll practice a clean way to say what you mean without raising your voice or shutting down, even if the other person is heated. Finally, you'll see how to use all of it in a real, messy conversation that would normally pull you into the same old loop, so you can end the night with relief instead of tension, and actually sleep. And here's the open loop I want you to keep in mind. Later, we're coming back to the argument where you're technically right but emotionally flooded, and the other person says, "So you're saying this is all my fault?" In that exact moment, one sentence will decide whether the night ends in connection or cold silence, and you're going to have it ready. Here's the sentence to keep ready when emotion spikes. Before I respond, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. Say it slowly, and then wait. That single line shifts the entire dynamic because it forces a pause without sounding defensive or evasive. In the next few moments, you stop preparing your counterattack, the other person feels heard instead of challenged, and the conversation moves from collision to clarity. This works because most arguments don't escalate due to disagreement, they escalate due to perceived dismissal. When emotions rise, the brain narrows its focus. You're no longer listening for information, you are listening for threat. By signaling that you're trying to understand, you interrupt that threat response in both yourself and the other person. Your nervous system gets a moment to settle, and theirs does too. You're no longer two people fighting for airtime, you're one person speaking and one person actually receiving it. That alone lowers the temperature enough for a reason to re-enter the room. Picture a familiar North American moment. You're on a video call with a coworker late in the afternoon. They say, "You dropped the ball on this deadline," and you feel the heat rush up your neck. Your instinct is to defend yourself, list everything you've been juggling, and point out what they missed. Instead, you say, "Before I respond, let me make sure I understand what you're saying." You let them finish. They explain the impact the delay had on their work. As they talk, you notice your shoulders drop. By the time it's your turn, you are no longer swinging back, and you're addressing the real issue. The conversation shifts from blame to problem solving, and you both leave the call intact. Here's the tiny action to practice today. The next time someone criticizes you or sounds frustrated, repeat back one short version of what you heard before adding your own point. Keep it under 10 words. Do it once. That's it. You're not agreeing, you're clarifying. The measurable result is simple: the other person slows down instead of speeding up. Now take a brief slow practice moment. Wherever you are, unclench your jaw. Drop your tongue from the roof of your mouth. Take one breath in through your nose and let it out longer than you took it in. As you exhale, imagine the urge to interrupt sliding down and away. This isn't about calm as a personality trait, it's about creating a half-second of space where choice becomes possible. What often surprises people is how powerful this feels internally. Instead of feeling weak or passive, you feel grounded. You're still present, still engaged, but not trapped. That grounding is what lets you stay aligned with your values instead of your reflexes. Marcus Aurelius hinted at this when he reminded himself that other people's actions don't have to dictate his inner state. You're not controlling the outcome, you're controlling your response. This tool also protects you from the trap we teased earlier. Remember that moment where you're right, flooded, and one sentence away from turning the night sour? This is the first move that keeps you from stepping into it. By seeking understanding first, you prevent the argument from becoming a referendum on who's at fault. You stay in the conversation without surrendering your position. The deeper benefit shows up later. When people consistently feel understood by you, even during conflict, they lower their guard faster the next time. Arguments shorten. Trust compounds. And perhaps most importantly, you stop replaying conversations in your head at midnight, wishing you'd said something different. You did say something different because you gave yourself time to choose it. This isn't about being agreeable or letting things slide. It's about staying in control of your role in the exchange. When you can pause, reflect, and then respond, you move from reacting to leading. And once you've felt that shift a few times, you'll start to recognize the early signs of emotional takeover before it happens, which sets us up for the next idea you'll need when understanding alone isn't enough. The moment usually starts quietly. You're standing in the kitchen or sitting in the car, and the other person says something that lands sideways. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just sharp enough. You always make things harder than they need to be. Your chest tightens. Your mind races ahead to every past example. And before you realize it, your tone changes. You're no longer trying to solve the issue. You're trying to correct the record. The mistake most people make right here is subtle but destructive. You treat the argument like a debate to be won instead of a signal to be handled. You start explaining, justifying, stacking facts, and defending your character. The more you explain, the less heard you feel. The more you defend, the more the other person digs in. What feels like clarity to you sounds like resistance to them. Here's the correction that changes the direction of the conversation: separate the emotion from the claim before you address either one. The sentence sounds like this: I hear the frustration. Let's deal with one thing at a time. Say it calmly, without edge, and then stop. That line does two things at once. It acknowledges the emotional charge without absorbing it, and it narrows the scope so you don't get dragged into every unresolved issue from the past. This works because emotional overwhelm thrives on expansion. When feelings spike, the brain wants to generalize. Always. Never. Every time. By slowing the conversation down to one issue, you reduce cognitive load for both of you. The nervous system relaxes when the problem feels contained. You're no longer fighting a cloud of accusations. You're responding to something specific and manageable. Try this in a real North American scenario. You're discussing finances with your partner, and they say, "You're careless with money." The old reaction is instant defense. You list your sacrifices, your good intentions, and your stress. Instead, you say, "I hear that you're worried. Let's talk about this one purchase." The shift is immediate. The conversation moves from who you are to what happened. That's a fight you can actually resolve. Here's the tiny action for today. The next time an argument starts to widen, deliberately shrink it. Ask yourself, what is the smallest part of this I can respond to right now? Then respond only to that. Measure success by whether the volume drops, not whether you feel vindicated. Pause for a brief pattern interrupt. Take one slow breath. As you inhale, notice where the tension is sitting in your body. As you exhale, imagine setting down a heavy bag you've been carrying into the conversation. You don't need to solve everything at this moment. You just need to keep it from getting worse. What often trips people up here is the fear that narrowing the issue means conceding. It doesn't. It means choosing effectiveness over ego. Epictetus warned that insisting on having the last word often costs you peace. When you stop trying to win the whole argument, you start influencing how it unfolds. This approach also protects you from emotional whiplash. When you defend everything at once, you exhaust yourself. When you address one thing cleanly, you conserve energy and credibility. The other person senses that you're not panicking, and panic loses its grip when it's not mirrored. Notice how this builds on what you already practiced. First, you created space by seeking understanding. Now, you prevent overload by containing the discussion. Together, these moves keep you present instead of reactive. You're still engaged, still honest, but not scattered. And remember the moment we teased earlier, where you're right and flooded and the conversation is about to tip. This is where it usually goes wrong. One loaded phrase turns into 10 grievances. By separating emotion from the claim, you stop the pile-on before it starts. You keep the night from unraveling. The deeper payoff comes later, when you realize you didn't need to rehearse the argument afterward. You said what mattered, you stayed steady, and you didn't betray your own standards. That feeling of internal consistency is what emotional control actually looks like. Not silence. Not domination. Just clarity under pressure. There's a popular belief that sounds reasonable but quietly sabotages you. If the other person is emotional, you either match their intensity or you lose your position. People assume that staying calm means giving ground, that a steady voice equals surrender. That belief is false, and in high-pressure moments, it's exactly what pulls you into reactions you later regret. The truth is simpler and more demanding. The person who controls the pace controls the outcome. When you let someone else's urgency dictate your tone, your speed, or your words, you give up leverage you didn't need to surrender. Emotional control under pressure isn't about being passive. It's about choosing when and how you engage so your message actually lands. Here's the instruction that holds when things get heated: slow the conversation before you state your position. The script is short and direct. I want to answer this well, not fast. Say it once, evenly, and then take a breath before you continue. That line does something powerful. It reframes the pause as intention, not avoidance. You're not backing away. You're setting terms. This works because urgency amplifies distortion. When voices rise and timing compresses, the brain shifts into threat mode. Accuracy drops. Empathy disappears. By explicitly slowing the exchange, you reset expectations. You give your nervous system time to come back online, and you invite the other person to do the same. You're not asking permission to pause. You're declaring how the conversation will proceed. Imagine this in a pressure-filled North American context. You're in a meeting where a project is behind schedule, and a supervisor pushes you for an immediate explanation. The room feels tight. Eyes are on you. Your instinct is to rush, justify, or overpromise. Instead, you say, I want to answer this well, not fast. You take a breath. Then you explain the real constraint and a clear next step. The room settles. Your credibility rises because you didn't scramble. Now practice the slow moment. Wherever you are, plant both feet on the floor. Let your shoulders drop slightly. Take one breath in through your nose and exhale as if you're fogging a mirror. As you exhale, feel the ground under your feet. This is how you anchor yourself when pressure tries to knock you off balance. It's not dramatic. It's physical and immediate. The stakes here are real. When you rush under pressure, you say things you can't easily walk back. You agree to terms you resent. You escalate conflicts that could have stayed contained. And afterward, you carry the residue, replaying what you should have said, wishing you'd slowed down. This tool protects you from that spiral by giving you a clean entry point back into intention. This idea shows up repeatedly in Stoic writing. Seneca observed that anger is most powerful when it moves unchecked, and weakest when delayed. You're not suppressing emotion. You're preventing it from dictating your behavior. That distinction matters. Notice how this stress tests everything you've learned so far. Seeking understanding creates space. Containing the issue prevents overload. Slowing the pace under pressure ensures you don't collapse when the stakes rise. These tools aren't fragile. They're designed for moments when someone is watching, waiting, or pushing. We're about to bring all of this together in a single situation that feels uncomfortably familiar. It's a conversation that starts late in the day, after you're already tired, when a small comment threatens to turn into something bigger. As you step into that moment, you'll feel the old reaction tug at you, the urge to speed up, explain, or snap back. This time, you'll recognize it as a signal, not a command. And when you slow down instead of reacting, something subtle but important happens. You stay aligned with yourself. You speak from steadiness rather than strain. You leave the interaction with your dignity intact, regardless of how the other person behaves. That's the real measure of emotional control under pressure, not how loud you can be, but how centered you remain when it counts. It's late in the evening, and you're already worn down from the day. You're sitting at the edge of the bed or leaning against the kitchen counter when the conversation turns. It starts small, almost casually. A comment about something you forgot to do. A tone that feels sharper than necessary. You feel that familiar surge rising in your chest, the one that tells you this is about to become more than it needs to be. Your old reaction is right there, ready. You want to explain yourself immediately. You want to point out everything you did. You want to correct the tone before it gets worse. Your mouth is almost moving before your mind has caught up. This is usually the moment where things spiral, where a tired night turns into distance, silence, or a fight that lingers into the next day. Instead, you pause. Not dramatically. Just enough to notice the heat in your body. You say, before I respond, let me make sure I understand what you're saying. The room changes slightly. The other person keeps talking. They explain that they felt ignored, or stressed, or unsupported. As you listen, your shoulders drop a bit. You realize this isn't about the task itself. It's about how the day landed on them. You feel the urge to defend yourself anyway. It hasn't gone away. It's still there, pressing. This is where the conversation usually widens, pulling in old examples and general statements. You catch that impulse and narrow it. I hear the frustration, you say, steady and clear. Let's deal with this one thing right now. You're not dismissing their feelings. You're containing the moment so it doesn't overflow. There's a brief silence. Not the heavy kind. Just a pause. You take a slow breath, longer on the exhale, feeling your feet on the floor. This is the slow practice inside the moment. You're not trying to calm them. You're grounding yourself. When you speak again, your voice isn't rushed. I didn't mean for it to come across that way. Here's what I can do differently tomorrow. The old reaction almost takes over right here. Part of you wants to add more. To justify. to revisit past situations to make your point stronger. You feel that pull, and instead of fighting it, you slow the pace. I want to answer this well, not fast. You let that sentence stand on its own. You don't fill the space immediately. The pressure eases. What's happening now is subtle but important. The conversation hasn't disappeared. The issue hasn't been erased. But the emotional charge has dropped. You're still talking about the problem, not about each other's character. The night hasn't turned into a courtroom or a standoff. It's just two people working through something while tired. As the conversation winds down, you notice something different. Your body isn't buzzing. Your jaw isn't tight. You don't feel the need to replay the exchange in your head to see if you won or lost. You held your boundary without attacking. You stayed present without shutting down. You didn't abandon yourself to keep the peace, and you didn't blow things up to feel heard. Later, when the lights are off and the house is quiet, you feel calmer than usual. Not because everything is perfect, but because you didn't make it worse. You didn't say the thing you'd regret. You didn't escalate just to release the tension. You stayed aligned with the person you want to be in moments like this. That's the real outcome here. A calmer night. A conflict reduced instead of multiplied. A sense of internal steadiness that carries into sleep instead of anxiety. You didn't control the other person's emotions. You controlled your response. And that control didn't come from force. It came from pacing, clarity, and restraint applied at the right moments. This is what it looks like when the tools work together in real life. Not perfectly. Not mechanically. Just enough to keep a meaningful relationship from taking unnecessary damage. And once you've experienced this kind of ending a few times, you start trusting yourself in conflict. You know you don't have to rush, explode, or disappear to get through it. You can stay. You can speak. And you can walk away intact. When you look back over what you've just learned, the core lesson is simple but demanding. Reacting happens fast and feels automatic. Responding takes intention and feels slower. One scatters you. The other keeps you aligned. Emotional control isn't about winning arguments or staying perfectly calm. It's about choosing your response even when your body wants to sprint ahead of your values. First, you learned how to interrupt the surge before it takes over by creating space and signaling understanding. That pause shifted the conversation from threat to clarity and gave your nervous system time to settle. Then you saw how arguments spiral when everything gets lumped together, and how narrowing the issue keeps you from being dragged into old grievances that don't belong to the moment. Next, you learned how to slow the pace under pressure, not as avoidance, but as leadership, so urgency doesn't force you into sloppy words or empty concessions. Finally, you watched how these moves work together in real life, inside a tired evening where the old reaction almost took over, but didn't. Each step built on the last, turning emotional control from an idea into something you can actually feel and use. Now let's lock this in with 3 things you can do today. First, choose one sentence from this lesson and write it somewhere you'll see it, a notes app, a sticky note, or a reminder. The goal isn't memorization, it's availability, so when emotion spikes, the words are already there. Second, practice slowing one conversation down on purpose today, even if it's small. Say you want to answer well, not fast, and notice what happens in your body when you give yourself that permission. Third, after your next disagreement, ask yourself one question before you replay it. Did I stay aligned with my values? That single check replaces rumination with reflection. As you do this, expect resistance. Your habits didn't form overnight, and they won't disappear instantly. There will be moments where you remember the tool too late, or use it awkwardly, or feel exposed for slowing things down. That's normal. Emotional control is a practice, not a switch. Each time you pause instead of react, even imperfectly, you're reinforcing a different pattern. Over time, that pattern becomes your default. The deeper shift happens quietly. You stop fearing conflict as much because you trust yourself inside it. You know you don't have to dominate to be respected or disappear to keep the peace. You can stay present, speak clearly, and leave with your self-respect intact. That trust in yourself is what actually changes how arguments feel. They become moments to navigate, not threats to survive. If this lesson resonated, the next thing to watch is about boundaries, specifically how to say no without guilt or over-explaining. A good follow-up title would be How to Set Boundaries Without Sounding Cold or Selfish. It matters because emotional control and boundaries work together. One keeps you steady in the moment. The other prevents the same conflicts from repeating over and over. And remember this as you move forward. You don't need to be perfect in arguments. You need to be intentional. Every time you slow down, clarify, and choose your response, you're reinforcing the person you're becoming. That consistency is what people feel when they say you're grounded, reliable, or hard to rattle. It's not because you don't feel things. It's because feelings no longer run the show. If you feel messages like this need to reach more people, hit like, tap subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments.